Hey everybody, this is Dylan with Bible A to Z. So today we are going to be in one of the most debatable topics or passages in the Old Testament, and that's discussing the Nephilim. So this is in Genesis chapter 6. There's a lot of different interpretations. So just in the commentaries that I was reading, I saw 6 or 7 different interpretations of what this passage means. A lot of people speak very forcefully about how they know it means this or they know it means that. I'm not quite so sure. I will tell you what the different views are that I saw, give you kind of a quick snapshot of those, and then I'll tell you where I land and why. But before getting into that, let's first go to the text in question, which is Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. It says, "When mankind began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, My spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind, who bore children to them. They were the powerful men of old, the famous men." Be the other thought of what the 120 years means in verse 3. Now, jumping into the main point of this passage, talking about the Nephilim and the sons of God, those are what is the controversial areas. So whenever it talks about the daughters of man or the daughters of mankind, it's basically universally recognized that these would be women, that these are human women, and basically all sides agree on that point. But that's basically where the agreement ends. So I'm going to break this up into just a few different interpretations of the meaning of these figures in this passage. Now, there might be some subcategories within these, but this is just a good basic outline of what the different categories are. So the first would be the Sethite view. So the Sethite view would say that the sons of God represents Seth and the lineage of Seth, and the daughters of man would symbolize the ungodly descendants of Cain. And so these are the descendants of Seth and Cain intermingling. One was a godly line, one was an ungodly line, and that would be what this passage is speaking about. Now, in this interpretation, the offspring would be, of course, human, 100% human being, with both sides involved being human. Now, the problem with this view would be is that it would be tough to call a lineage godly when essentially all of them were destroyed in the flood. So if this is a very godly line, and then God only saves Noah and his family, then that would point to the fact that there was very few Sethites that actually were godly at this point in time. Another problem that we have with this is that even in this, to call the Sethites the godly line while marrying unbelievers is right from the outset an ungodly action. Not to say that a person can't love the Lord and commit sin, but this was a very serious sin, and they were far gone from the Lord at this point. So there are a few hang-ups with this interpretation as far as saying that this is just the lineage of Seth and it's just the lineage of Cain. So we see from the Sethite view that the sons of God were the descendants of Seth, and we see that the Nephilim in that view were 100% human. Now, the next view would be the fallen men view, and in this, it would say that godly men were the sons of God. So godly men were the sons of God. They took ungodly wives, and then through this intermingling produced the Nephilim. The Nephilim would then go on to follow false gods down through the line. So in this view, the sons of God were 100% human. The offspring that were birthed were 100% human. The Nephilim were just human giants, but that would be it. And much of the same things that could be said about the Sethite view could also be said about the fallen men view. More or less the only difference is in the fallen men view, it didn't necessarily have to be from the lineage of Seth on one side and the lineage of Cain on the other side. It would have been both sides maybe being godly or ungodly given the marriage at that specific time. But the view that I'm going to endorse from my study, and this is one of those things that, in a few years with more study, I might have a different interpretation. But right now, where I've landed, and I don't see it changing at all, but where I've landed is what is called the fallen angel view. This is the view that is endorsed by Jewish historian Josephus. Jewish tradition maintains that this is talking about angelic beings, and also the Greek Septuagint, which was the Greek Old Testament, that people in New Testament times would read. Their Old Testament would have sons of God actually say angels of God. And so this was the historic view for many years, would be that this sons of God passage was speaking of fallen angels. So sons of God is used 4 times in the Old Testament, and all 4 times seem to point to the fact that this is not just a human, but that this is an angelic being or beings. So once is in this passage in Genesis 6. The other 3 are all in the book of Job. And I'm going to read those, and we're going to kind of see how it seems to be pointing to an angelic being. Job 1:6 says, "One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them." So here we see that it talks about the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. Seems to point to the fact that they were angelic beings. Job 2:1 says, "One day the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord." So once again, this seems to point to the fact that these angels were there as Satan was going before the Lord in his presence. And then finally, Job 38, verses 4 and then 6 and 7, it says this, and this is God speaking here. It says, "Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. What supports its foundations? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy." So it talks about the morning stars and all of the angelic beings shouting for joy in this passage in Job as well. Now, this passage that we're about to look at was one of the other reasons why I landed on the position that I do. In Jude verses 5 through 8, it says this, "Now I want to remind you, although you came to know all these things once and for all, that Jesus saved a people out of Egypt and later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their own position, but abandoned their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains in deep darkness for the judgment on the great day. Likewise, or in the same way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns committed sexual immorality and perversions, and serve as an example by undergoing the punishment of eternal life." Now, some people say that this passage is talking about Satan and the third of the angels that chose to follow him in rebellion against God. But the reason why this can't be the right view is because it says in the passage that they are kept in eternal chains for the judgment on the great day. Now, is Satan in eternal chains right now? Is he in eternal chains in hell at the moment? No. Right now, the Bible says that he roams the earth seeking whom he may devour. So Satan is not in hell. He's not in the eternal chains that this passage is speaking of at the moment. And if he was, it wouldn't make any sense when in Revelation it talks about how he'll be chained for 1,000 years and then he'll be let go for one last shot at the end. But that's not what this says. This says that these angels are kept in eternal chains for the judgment on the great day. And then it says something that it's trying to give us a comparison. It says, in the same way, or likewise. So in the whatever it is, it's trying to give a comparison here. It says, likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns committed sexual immorality and perversions. So these beings, these fallen angels in verse 6 that are judged, that whatever they did was bad, it then goes in the very next verse and compares what they did to the sexual sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so this would be pointing to the fact that these angelic beings had a sexual sin, a perversion that had happened at some point. And the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as the Nephilim, are similar in another way, which is that both of them, with their sexual encounters, go against nature. In the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was homosexual sin. In the case of the Nephilim, it was transspeciesism. It was angels with humans. God created humans to be with humans. He created men to be with women. And in both cases, those go against God's created order. Now, 2 Peter speaks about this as well whenever it says in chapter 2, verses 4 through 5, "For if God didn't spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into hell, and delivered them in chains of utter darkness to be kept for judgment." So that's just a portion of the passage. But if he is doing this, and he did, we know that Satan right now is not in the eternal chains. He's not in hell. He is on the earth seeking whom he may devour. This judgment was upon angelic beings, fallen angels or demons, who sinned by having sex with female women. With human women, these fallen angels procreated and somehow produced this offspring, which were the Nephilim. So unlike all the other views, this view is a mixture of a human hybrid with a demonic spirit. And it produced these Nephilim, which were hideous. And, then the very next passage, it talks about how God saw and he was going to judge the world through this flood with Noah because of the human wickedness and the wickedness that was on the face of the earth. Now look at 1 Peter. It says this, "In which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in the past were disobedient, when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. In it a few, that is 8 people, were saved through water." So here it's once again, it's mentioning this passage that we're looking at it whenever it says that these spirits are in prison, and it talks about how God was waiting patiently in the days of Noah. In this exact same passage, it's talking about Noah, and that's the very next person on the scene in this Genesis passage, and these spirits that God judged because of their wickedness. Now in that passage in Jude that we read a moment ago, where it alluded to that these angels are kept in eternal chains, and it says likewise, and talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. If we look at that passage talking about Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19, it talks about how there are these 2 angels. It says this, "The 2 angels entered Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in Sodom's gateway. When Lot saw them, he got up to meet them. He bowed with his face to the ground and said, 'My lords, turn aside to your servant's house, wash your feet, and spend the night. Then you can get up early and go on your way.' No, they said, 'we would rather spend the night in the square.' But he urged them so strongly that they followed him and went into his house. He prepared a feast and baked unleavened bread for them, and they ate." So right here we have angels who, yes, they're spiritual beings. They took on a human form and they physically ate. So there's nothing that would say here that they were unable to do physical things. They were physically able to genuinely consume food despite being spiritual beings. And then if you go to the next passage, it then says, "Before they went to bed, the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, the whole population surrounded the house. They called out to Lot and said, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Send them out to us so that we can have sex with them.'" So in this passage, it doesn't then say, well, that's impossible. These are angels. The angels don't say, no, that can't be done. It seems to assume that what they were wanting to do, had the angels not blinded the people who were knocking on the door wanting to do this evil action, it seems to be pointing to the fact that had something not intervened, that they actually would have taken advantage of these angels in human form. Now, some people would say that I thought, it talks about in Matthew where it says, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." So they say, well, how is it that these angels are supposedly marrying these women, where it says here that they saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. But in this passage in Matthew, it says that they are not given in marriage in heaven. That doesn't have to be where they are not able to marry necessarily on earth. And according to this view, it would say that they did marry them because they got married here. In Matthew, it doesn't say anything about anywhere but they are not married in heaven. This is one of those passages. It's hotly debated, discussed. The more you try to study it, the more you're gonna get altering viewpoints, and people make strong cases for the view that they hold for this. This is not a deal breaker with fellowship with other believers, because likely if you have a Sunday school class for people who've actually studied this type of topic, most likely, if you talk to 10 people who've discussed it or have studied it, and you'll get probably 5 different people with differing views on it, because there doesn't seem to just be something that has to be this or the other. This is not something that only conservatives hold this view and liberals hold this other view. I think, though, that the view that was that I've tried to explain to you guys, the fallen angel view, that says that these demons cohabitated with women and produced this mixed race, human and demon, which produced the Nephilim, would seem to be the best explanation for Jude 5 through 8, as well as the fact that it is backed up by the historical tradition in Jewish culture and in early Christian thought. This was what was taught. So I hope that this maybe gave you a better understanding of at least what some of the basic views of the sons of God and the Nephilim were, and hopefully we can continue to study the Word together. And I hope you have a good one. Until next time, take care.